What's up, everybody? This is Scott Leese. I'm here with my friend Richard Harris, and this is the Surf and Sales podcast. We're here today talking to Collin Cadmus, VP of Sales at Aircall. And I've been personally really excited for this episode. Number one, because Colin and I have talked like a million times over text and LinkedIn and what have you, but never actually like seen each other live face to face before. So it's great to meet you here over Zoom. And number two, one of the reasons I'm excited for this is because Colin is one of the few VPs of sales, heads of sales, what have you out there that speaks his mind about some things that are deemed quite controversial at times, which I love. If you know me, you know that that's right up my alley. So welcome to the show, Colin.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we'll try not to talk about too much that might get you in trouble with, anybody where you're at right now. But no promises.
Okay. We could dance on the line a little bit.
That's all right. Which actually leads to a really good question. How do you do that? I mean, is Aircall's, vision that they trust that in Colin? Is it, hey, you sort of said, look, I am who I am. I wear it on my sleeve. I'm not going to embarrass you, but I'm not going to hide behind stuff. Like you guys are not a small company, and you certainly have. It feels like a lot more ability to. It feels like they trust you a lot, which is good. But how does that come about in an organization? How do you keep that kind of culture?
Yeah. So when I started posting, I kept it very PG, right? It was just all sales tips. And then I started to get a louder voice on some bigger topics. And, initially, like there've been, I guess, a series of conversations with my CEO over the course of me building the following and making more noise, so to speak. First of all, so it's a French-founded company. All of our founders are French. They are super cool, super relaxed, just chill guys who are, what's interesting about, I don't know if it's the French culture or if it's just them, but like our CEO, for example, is incredibly intelligent, but also incredibly goofy and just lighthearted and doesn't take things too seriously, right? Like if you lose 20 customers tomorrow, like, oh, what were we going to do? Right. Like, it's kind of like, and then he'll calculate a million ways that we're going to fix things, but he doesn't panic in the way that I'm used to with like the US, I guess, leadership teams that I've worked with in the past, which has been comforting. And so in terms of me posting stuff, there's definitely been a couple times where I've posted things that I probably shouldn't have. And he's talked to me a couple times about it. Like he doesn't tell me what I can or can't post, right? But what I lost sight of one particular time is that we have another office in Paris with 100 some odd people that I don't have extremely close relationships with because I don't see them every day. So they maybe don't understand my personality the same. They maybe don't understand the context. And this one particular post happened to be sort of showing off our top earners of a certain quarter. And I put very specific numbers in there to show off, to congratulate them, but also to show off that, this is a good place to come work and you can make a lot of money. What I didn't think of there is the perspective that everyone in the company would have seeing that, particularly if you're working out of another country doing the same job. And those numbers, those US income numbers, look substantially larger than what you're getting paid to do the same thing in another company. And, to me, I just assume, oh, well, they must understand that. But when you see the number and you maybe didn't know that, that can be annoying to people, and that ruffled some feathers. And so I dealt with that. But I've always, in the maybe 2 or 3 instances that's happened, I've always gone back to the fact that we preach that transparency is one of our 4 values. And I feel I'm just supporting that.
Yeah.
And then we kind of laugh about it and whatever. And he's just like, look, just think about, you're not just talking to your LinkedIn audience, right? You're also talking to everyone in the company, and just be aware of that. And there have been times where I've written posts now before I post it. I'm like, all right, now what would that team, how would they read that? It's important, I think, to think of it that way. But I also err on the side of taking a little risk as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a different beast when you've got people to report to and people working under you and that kind of thing. Yeah. I can tell you, we've talked about this plenty of times before, but like, it's very freeing once you don't have that kind of structure.
They see
in
the benefits too, though, and I think that's why he doesn't hold it back. I mean, he's come back from visiting investors in Paris and whatnot, and he's like, you're a celebrity. They're like, wait, you guys have that VP of sales, so and so, and these are investors in the middle of Europe. He's like,
Right.
so he knows like I'm helping to get the name out there, and there's benefit for the business too.
Do you see?
I'm a celebrity.
Do you
That's
see
what he said.
this?
I don't see it that way, but
do you see this stuff as like a core function of the head of sales role now? I actually do. I actually think that it's increasingly important for VPs and heads of sales to build a brand, have consistent kind of thought leadership, what have you, participate in panels and discussions, be visible for a lot of different reasons. Perhaps chief among them is just for recruiting purposes, right? I mean, I didn't spend one red cent in 3 years when I was at Qualia recruiting, not one. I didn't have to. I could make one post and I'd have dozens of resumes flying my way. And if you trickle it on down, right, and it's, Colin's the VP of sales and Scott's the director of sales and Richard is the sales manager, and all three of you have, strong followings and posts, consistent, valuable content. Who doesn't want to go work for that particular team? Because from the outside, you're like, good Lord, what? I could learn from these people all day, every day. This is amazing. So I'm curious if you see it the same way I do. I think it is going to be almost mandatory that, sales leaders have that kind of presence that you've built for yourself.
Definitely. In many ways, right? So the recruiting thing is huge. When I recruited, one of the hardest roles, I had two really difficult roles to fill. One was bringing in a director of sales development, which is not an easy role to find someone who's really good at that, especially in New York. And during the time I was recruiting, it was a buyer's market, right? Not a seller's market. And so that was a hard role to fill. And I found the guy through LinkedIn and I cold messaged him and we started talking that way. And it spawned from that. But then we hired his whole team and we hired a lot of people. I want to say it was like 20 or 30 people in a very short amount of time. And that was when I really saw the impact of it. And I wasn't even trying to use LinkedIn in that way. Like I wasn't writing posts thinking this is going to attract people. But I remember our recruiter just coming up to me saying, another candidate said they saw your post on LinkedIn and they want to work here. Another candidate. And now it's just like, I hear that every day, all the time, right? And it's even happens outside of sales.
That's right. It happens outside of your department as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You should get like that jersey bonus, right? Like when Tom Brady goes to Tampa Bay, I'm sure it's in his contract that for a certain percentage of jerseys that are sold, he gets some of that money.
Scott and I were just talking about that.
Interesting point that Colin and I were actually talking about this kind of thing. Like there's some ancillary value that we bring to the table as a sales leader, right? You can bring an audience. So let's say that Richard, you run a particular company and Colin and I both work for you, right? Colin and I's combined LinkedIn audience is, I don't know, 100,000, let's say, right? So you might make a post about this particular event and it goes almost nowhere. Then you ask us to, participate, share it, or be on the panel, and all of a sudden you get, a couple of thousand registrations. Well, should we get a jersey fee? Should we get a cut of that somehow? It doesn't happen. You don't get the registration numbers. You don't get the sponsorship revenue without the people who are pushing it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So where's the line there? So I'm curious what you think about this, Richard. You've been out of the operator role longer, than I have. So I'm curious for an outsider's perspective now.
It's a little bit of a challenge because my perspective on that is different, right? Like I'm very grateful when anybody ever asks me to speak at an event, or do a podcast or do a webinar and things like that, because I know I'm driving registrations. I do find it interesting that there are times where I'm asked to speak at an event. There's not only are they charging people to come to the event, they might even be charging them to come to whatever training I'm going to do. And
but hold on, you got to pretend you're working for a company now. That's what I'm asking. Not you right now in your current role. you as Colin right now, or me as 7 months ago at
Yeah.
Qualia, and Aircall or Qualia or XYZ company basically using Richard and your brand to monetize.
Well, so I think it's in two different ways, right? Like to a certain extent, where's my equity on that, right? So there's a big piece of that I help affect equity that way. I think there's a big piece of, look, if I'm doing it from sales, well, that's just me doing my job to protect myself, to make my equity, to hit my number, to get the right salespeople. Like that is part of my job. That is in my title, is to hire and recruit and train a team to be successful, right? If they're now starting to leverage me for marketing or engineering as the brand, or they start to make me the face of the brand, there could be something said, but I think it has to come to an equity side. I don't think you can ask for a,
then therefore in that argument, folks like Colin should be lobbying for a bigger salary, bigger OTE, and a bigger chunk of equity than a different VP who doesn't have that kind of pull.
I've never lobbied for any of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Like why? Like it's hard for the CEO or even the VC to say no to that with a straight face. The only no they have is, well, it's never been done before. And the obvious answer is, every time I hear that from a startup CEO or startup VC, it's like, well, then why are we in the VC world? Everything we do is about never having been done before. I'm just applying it, and you're just not used to hearing it.
I think the way they see it, though, when you make an ask, it depends on the current environment of the company, how things are going, but I think to them, when you ask for something, if the company's doing really well and there's good trajectory for you there, I think they look at it more like, is he going to leave if I say no?
Yes, they do need to think that. Now, that doesn't mean you need to be a jerk about it or threaten it or even say it. But it's kind of like, guess what? When the economy turns down, are you going to hang on to me? Because the answer is no. Like you can spin that really quickly, and you have to do it.
Although that's where some of this value comes in, right? And I would say that, if my job were on the line, right, maybe I'm not getting paid to help drive registrants to these events and to get big name speakers, out to our events, but that's a value I'm giving to the business, right? And so maybe my sales team struggled for a quarter, but now it's not just a question of losing our VP of sales because he missed a target. It's a question of losing all of these other added values that you're bringing. And so for me, that's why I feel like, would I like to get paid for those things? Sure. Is there maybe a world someday where it evolves to that? Probably, and maybe not in my lifetime, but I think eventually, yes.
Put it to you this way, Colin. If you haven't LLC'd yourself as Collin Cadmus LLC, you're doing yourself a disservice, because you are a business entity with influence and scope and ability to affect. Right now, Aircall is absolutely paying you for that. But in theory, they don't own you.
Yeah.
Right? Any more than you own them. Look, if you leave, Aircall's not going to die, right?
Of course.
But if you leave, Colin's not going to die either, right? I've seen enough companies that have hired VPs of sales like you or Scott, and they think they figured it out. I don't think this is what's happening at Aircall. It sounds like you have a different relationship than other places I've thought of. And all of a sudden, that head of sales leaves, and they think they got it dialed in, and valuations decrease and drop. I feel like you're, take this the right way, because I don't know your loyalties. You're a little bit like a Belichick. Like, you've built a system, you've built something in place that my guess is, if you get promoted to a higher level, or someone comes and recruits you and makes you that CRO, and Aircall can't match that, the system that you've built will stay and be a strong infrastructure. And I know you as a human, you would never burn that bridge with Aircall or anybody. You would want to make sure it's left in good hands. But, that is a intangible piece that is now becoming more and more tangible in these days, right? The beauty of all this data for sales is that it's now tangible as to what you bring, right? We know your completion rate. We know your accuracy rate. We know how well you do on a 3-step drop, a 5-step drop, a 7-step drop, right? We know how you're going to measure against this defense or that defense. So there's now a Collin Cadmus LLC, man. What's your jersey number going to be?
17.
There you go. Why 17?
That was my hockey number. I was born January 7, so 1-7. I wore it for my whole childhood. Yeah.
That's cool. Didn't know that.
I actually had a gold necklace that had a 17 on it once. And
Of course you did.
at the lowest point of my life, when I was living paycheck to paycheck off credit cards, I actually had to pawn it off to pay off a bill.
Wow.
So that
There's
when I think of that
motivation
number,
to never go back to that day ever again.
Yeah.
Just like, what was that? How long ago was that?
That was I graduated 2008. That was probably in 2009, my first or second year out of college.
And so just out of curiosity, how did that affect you? Because that's a meaningful piece, right? There's something sentimental about that for a long time. Like, how did that affect you or inspire you to start working? Did it affect you, or did you already have that work ethic and it was just like, oh shoot, I'm 6 months out of college and the loans are finally coming due and I just got to figure it out?
Yeah, I mean, it was 2008, right? That it was like what we're going through today, but I was just coming out of school. I had nothing, right? And so I took a job at CVS Pharmacy as an assistant store manager. I started as an intern. It was the only job I could get. But life is expensive. And at that point, I move out of the fraternity house and I've got my own apartment, and I'm thinking, oh, I'm making 40 grand a year. I got a salary. So, I got a nice apartment, not nice, but I had my own place to live. I had a car and I had my own expenses, and credit card bills started to pile up. And so, yeah, it got to a point where I started to see the interest accumulating on the credit card bills, and I just wanted to pay it down. So I took anything that I owned, really, and I took one trip to the pawn shop and just got enough to chip away at that debt. But I don't know that it wasn't as big. It almost sounds more traumatic than what it actually was for me. But looking back at it, it's like, I can't believe I had to actually do that. Because damn, I wish I had that necklace today, because I had it for so long and it was custom made in Aruba on a vacation. I remember it, and I just so loosely let it go. But I think that's kind of how I make decisions, is I'm looking around my apartment. I have some shit that's worth some money. I got credit that I owe, and I need to pay my debt. And so,
How long did it take you? Do you moved away from CBS and retail and broke into inside sales?
It's 4 years. I moved to Rhode Island in 2004 for college, graduated in 2008. As a senior at my school, you had to do an internship to graduate from the business program that I was in. And so you meet with your career counselor, and they give you all of these companies that the school has a relationship with, that they can help tee up the internship. And CVS, their headquarters is in Rhode Island, so they have a very good relationship there. So I did the internship. There were like 16 interns, and it was this whole program where if you did really well, they were going to hire a couple people or give you a job offer. And so I crushed that. Got the job offer. And at that point, like, A, I knew the job market was bad. B, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life anyway. And C, I didn't want to leave my college buddies, right? A lot of them were still in school, and I liked the idea of staying in that town. And here was a chance for me to get an apartment and stay there and not have to leave. I lived there for 4 years. I built a life there. I didn't want to go. So I took that job. And I actually liked it for a while. I mean, I was learning so much. They put you through this incredible training program. You're basically in training to be a store manager. And the way they run those businesses is like, store manager owns that place, right? Like, you are running that building as if you owned it. Of course, you have the resources of corporate, but you're managing every detail of the business, from inventory to hiring to firing to preventing, theft, every detail. And there's intense training that they put you through that goes on for years. And so I did the assistant manager role for 2 years, where you're really being mentored by the store manager, some guy who's been doing this for 16 years, lives, eats, breathes, and sleeps this stuff. And then the whole goal there is to get promoted and get your own store. And they even put your name on the front of the building. It says store manager right under the hours, Collin Cadmus. And like that, for me, I got my first store in the slummy west side of Providence, Rhode Island, where no one even spoke English. It was all low income. People were our most common, the largest percentage of our revenue was run through EBT cards. We had a massive amount of theft there, and all the advertisements on the radio in the store were in Spanish. I didn't even speak Spanish, but imagine me running that store. But I did, and it was an opportunity to take a store that was really being run into the ground. The last manager did a shit job with it, and I cleaned it up and did a lot of work. And I think it was like 6 months later, I got promoted to go over to the east side of Providence, on Thayer Street, Brown University area, rich college kids, in a store that did over 100K a week in retail business. And that was a lot of fun. So anyway, I'm rambling on here, but I did it for 4 years, but it eventually got to the point where all of my college buddies had graduated and left. So I was now, my social life was slowly,
You're the last guy. You're the last one there.
Yeah,
No more
yeah.
fraternity parties, Colin.
What's that?
No more fraternity parties for Colin.
No, it died down. And honestly, I was working too many hours anyway. So between putting in 80 hours a week at the store, because you own that place, and all they do is chip away at your budget of payroll hours. But the same amount of work has to be done. Every day you come in, there's a computer system that tells you all of these tasks that have to be completed. And so it was really tough because they just kept cutting budgets back. And the only person on salary in the store that wasn't hourly, because your budget is based on how many payroll hours you have. You're right. So the only person who can pick up the slack is you, because you're the only one on salary. And so I'm quickly working 80 hours a week, taking in delivery trucks at 4 a.m., coming back to open the store, like just crazy shit. And it started to just get miserable. And so
So you inherited this really rough store, right? You have a language barrier, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, talk to me a little bit about the motivation it took to work with your team to get them to want to turn it around, to work with a very different look. You know, all three of us are, we all suffer from this affliction of being white men, where things just aren't as hard for us, and we have to admit it.
Yeah.
How did you earn their trust? Well, because those things I think translate. I don't care where you are, what organization, whether you're in sales or not. But I've definitely inherited bad sales teams. But what are some of the things you wanted to work on to try and chip away at that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I was not prepared, right? It was my first time getting thrown into that environment. And I think it's where I realized maybe a little bit of it comes naturally to me, because I just built good relationships with people. I made a couple tough decisions in the beginning to let some cancerous people go. And then I was lucky that there were already 3 or 4 people there that really wanted to do well. And what I've found, at least in my days at CVS, is oftentimes when a business is being run into the ground, whether it's a sales team or a CVS store, it's usually not the team, right? It's usually the leader, and they're refreshed to have someone come in who wants to do it right and who wants to hold them accountable, train them, and just treat them well, right? These are hourly workers who, will get abused in a sense, right? Like someone calls out sick and they just call you on your day off and force you to come in. And like, it was a matter of like, in those instances, I got off my ass on my day off and came in and filled that shift. And it's little decisions like that I think help the team start to respect you, because you're not walking all over them, taking advantage of them, and then they'll work harder for you. And that translates right into to sales.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what you're doing right now. I mean, you're in New York City, the hotbed for everything going on, at least here in America. But you're selling a solution that is arguably the right place, right time, given everything going on. And in theory, as an outsider looking in, I'm thinking to myself, like, geez, these guys' sales might be going up through the roof right now. You might have, people on the phone more than ever. So what is it like selling distributed team in New York City right now, in kind of one of the industries that is arguably booming right now? What does that feel like? Because I think that's very unique experience compared to what so many other people are going through right now.
Yeah, great question. So a lot of people are comparing us to Zoom, not to say that we're on anywhere near the level of Zoom, but similar sort of reaction, right? People go remote, there's an increased demand for the product, and there is a large part of that that's true. There's also a big difference. I would presume that Zoom is not having a significant impact with their existing customer base. I could be wrong, maybe they are, but for us, it's really a weird dynamic right now because the sales side is booming. So if you're in charge of new business, you have nothing but upside right now. But if you're in charge of managing our existing accounts, and I was just talking to Richard about this before we started, we have a huge chunk of our customer base that are in the travel industry, that are in hospitality.
Now you got to fight the renewal wars and things like that.
It's not even that, man. A lot of these companies are on month-to-month terms, and so we come in the morning, and well, I'll back up for a second. One of the competitive advantages of Aircall is the way we sell and price the service. And in a time like this, it's shitty for us, but we still believe it's the right thing to do. And so we very often don't lock people into licenses, right? Of course, you can save money and pay us annually and you'll get a better deal, but we will let people go month to month. They're going to pay a higher rate, but they can do that. And so a lot of our legacy customers that have been with us for a long time have grown to be some of our biggest customers, right? There's a few travel companies now, I won't name their names, but they were even in the press recently for their layoffs that they just did. And so if they're on a month-to-month plan, we literally, our CS director, I feel so bad for the guy because he wakes up in the morning and looks at a dashboard and he can just see that his largest account went from 1,000 agents on the phone to 5 overnight. And that MRR goes down immediately. And so we're in both of those scenarios. And of course, there's expansion opportunities that are happening that weren't happening. We're seeing education moving to remote and they need a phone system.
So
and maybe
as somebody who's the tip of the spear to go get new accounts, are you migrating away from, I would hope so and assume so, migrating away from industries that are being impacted the most, headed towards,
exactly
new pastures, so to speak? So what are some of the areas that you're farming right now and hunting in that you hadn't gone before?
Yeah, that's what has made this so exciting for us. So March was a big learning month where we see all sorts of accounts coming inbound to us that we never would have signed up. We're like, this is so far out of our ICP. We would have never called on them. And we don't know even if they're going to stay with us after this. And some of them even tell us this might be temporary, but we're like, this is a chance for us to learn, right? Let's see if we can go into this.
Can you give me an example of one or two of those?
Yeah, so universities, colleges, and government agencies. So we just signed a big deal with the New York Department of Homeless Shelter. I forget it, DHS, Department of Homeless Shelter, I think it's called. Government agencies. These are places that you normally have to be an approved vendor. You have to go through a crazy process to even get the chance to work with them. But all of those rules are waived right now during this crisis. And so they're coming to us, they're signing up really quickly. And so the two big focuses, so we went in, we got to the end of March and we built all crazy dashboards to analyze what's going on. We had this whole project where we weren't even tracking what industries companies were in. And so we all did this late night pizza project where we updated all of our accounts, industries, and created dashboards. Anyway, so we saw education increasing, we see health and wellness increasing, and we see government as well as nonprofits increasing. And so we spent a good week preparing to do what I'm calling our COVID ICP project. And that's what we just rolled out at the start of this month, which is taking what we're seeing on the inbound side that's unusual and putting in place an outbound strategy for it. And we're taking 50% of their time and allocating it towards that. So 25% to education, 25% to government. The other 50% keep playing the long game on what we know works. So we wrote out new cadences, got a little contest going on with our 2 SDR managers and myself. I took the education and wrote the cadence. They wrote the cadences for the other 2. And so we're having a little fun with that now. What's that?
What do you win?
Oh, just bragging rights of who writes the best cadence.
Right.
Yeah.
There's nothing more powerful than bragging rights, as you know.
For a sales leader, that's all it takes. If I can get the highest response rate from my director of sales development, he'll never hear the end of it.
Of course, if you don't get it, you're never going to hear the end of it too, right? Like
It's true. I'll find a way to. I'll blame it on the industry.
If he doesn't get it, he'll find a million excuses and reasons why. I mean, his job is
Well, it's because I did such
more
a good job
complicated.
hiring the guy who's
Yeah,
better than me.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Here's the
There's
answer.
a million reasons why.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I never thought I was going to win. I was doing this to motivate you. That's all.
What
I want to talk to you. I want to talk to Colin a little bit about equity and the lack of clarity and understanding that exists.
I've got notes on notes on notes.
Yeah. This is our
because I didn't want to miss
subject.
anything. Yeah.
This is our main subject here. You know, I could be wrong, but I feel like I was one of the first people to kind of speak out on this, and then you've spoken out about it, you know, a number of times as well. And other than you and I'm not really sure how many other operating VPs of sales have like chimed in and commented on it too much and stuck their necks out a little bit. So I feel like we're kindred spirits in this particular area. So where do we start, man? What are a couple things that you know, we need to do a little bit differently, or a couple things that sales leaders can do differently to help educate, you know, their team so people are informed?
So and that's why I took some notes. I took some time to think about it because I'm like, where do we start, right? There's a lot to dive into. And so I think a good place to start, right, because there's probably people listening who don't understand. If we jump right into the details, they're going to be really lost. So I think and I'm not a pro on this by any means, right? I've read a lot. Sam Altman has some great stuff out there. I've learned a lot through Revenue Collective and just reading and just, you know, talking to folks like yourself. But I think what the big thing that people need to first understand is when you just think about an employee stock option program and how it got to where it is today, my understanding is that when these programs were first designed, this was before the startup era, right? This is when you were getting stock options in a company that the options were already liquidable. They already had value.
It was already real money. It was real money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It was already money. And so if you got fired and you had some vested options, you didn't have to wonder, do I have the thousands of dollars I need to exercise those? Because you weren't going to sit on them and take a risk. It was money. You were cashing them out right away. And so those same programs got carried into the startup world where that's just not the case, right? And I think partially that happened because people just recycled something that was already written, but it definitely has continued because founders and VCs very often, not all of them, not my founders and VCs, but founders and VCs, they know that there's upside to that, right? They know that they can use this as a recruiting lever and they can make something sound really good. And people who are applying for these jobs are naive and they're uneducated and they don't know any better. And you don't find out the truth of all of this until the day comes that you think you're getting some money.
What's the truth? What are you talking about though?
Yeah, so that's where the details come into play, right? So first of all, there's a big difference between preferred and common stock, right? And I think that's the first point that a lot of people don't even know. And founders and VCs often have preferred stock, or sometimes founders don't even have preferred stock. Sometimes they have common stock. It's usually the VCs, right?
Let's be honest too. Like anybody who's an SDR, an AE, or a sales manager, or you know, even a sales director or a VP of common stock. You don't have preferred stock. There's no AE that I know of that has preferred stock.
But explain never. What the difference is. They don't know.
So the difference, it's not black and white, but the often difference is that there's multiples on payouts, and there's preferential treatment that happens in a liquidity event where someone with preferred stock may be getting their money back before you get yours, and they may get a multiple of it, which in certain scenarios could mean that you're getting nothing.
Yeah, it means there's nothing left for you potentially.
Right. Even in the case of a big exit.
Let's simplify it, Richard. Like what it means is all those people are getting paid, and in fact maybe paid 2-3 times more before you ever have a chance to get paid. At its most simple way. Yeah.
And there's different things about protection, right? If you think of the Skype story, I think that was a good one that a lot of people have read about. They just fired a whole ton of their employees before the acquisition closed, so they didn't have to pay anyone. And there was no protection on their rights to those ISOs, and they lost that. And these are people who worked their asses off to get the company to the place of an acquisition, and they got nothing. and they lost their job.
Yeah.
So things like that happen all the time.
So I wonder if I've spent actual time during the workday with my team doing training on equity and stock options and whatnot. Is that something that you guys at Aircall do, or is that something that you've taken it upon yourself to do, to try to make sure your team members know kind of their situation and what they're getting into?
Informally, yes. Most of the folks here who have significant equity as part of their comp package were here before I was here. And honestly, we're unusually transparent about this stuff at Aircall to begin with. I didn't really have to push in any sense of the way when I was negotiating my plan to get the transparency that I think a lot of people don't get. It was presented to me at face value, and I went through it and I came back with questions and they had very clear answers. There was no beating around the bush. It wasn't like, oh, you're going to get X thousand shares. And I had to ask, well, what are they worth? How many outstanding shares are there? No, that was all presented to me up front, right? Which is unusual.
And these are questions, by the way, that people should be asking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
If someone tells you you're getting, sorry, go ahead.
No, just say if you're in the process of being recruited for a role, what Colin's talking about, these are the questions that you should be asking. They might have been presented to Colin in a very transparent way, but if they weren't, I would hope that Colin would have been, smart enough to be like, well,
of course,
how many total shares are there? What's the strike price right now? Et cetera, right?
Yeah.
What are some of those questions very specifically?
Yeah. So
what are some of the questions that people should ask?
The first red flag is if someone makes an offer to you and they just tell you you're getting 5,000 shares, you're getting 10,000 shares, and that's all they tell you. You immediately know they're not being forthcoming with the information, and you should ask these questions anyway, but I think like that's red flag. They should have just told you that up front, because what you're telling me it means nothing. It's like telling you I'm going to pay you 100 of some currency, but I'm not going to tell you what the currency is. Is that a good deal? It's not you don't know what the hell it is, right? They could be Turkish lira and they're worth nothing. And so outstanding shares is how many shares are there in the company, right? And what's the valuation? What's the last strike price? And from there, you can figure out, or they should tell you anyway, but you can figure out what percentage of the business is actually being issued to you, right? And you can get a sense of what it's worth.
And those things matter because there are some sort of norms depending on stage of organization, the role of the organization, right? And things like that people should be aware of. I had a conversation. Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah. So for people listening, right, like this is really good. And it's very important as you're hitting that director and maybe the VP of sales role. Should SDRs, what should SDRs know about options, right? You're just coming out of college, right? You're Colin.
Here's what they should know. Here's what they should know. SDR, you are not getting fucking rich off however many options somebody is offering you as you move into your startup. It ain't happening. No SDR is going to be a millionaire. All right.
Definitely
no SDR
not.
is probably even going to become half a millionaire. And it would be a miracle situation if an SDR had enough options where they could make six figures before taxes, let alone after taxes.
Here's what you'll get. Here's what you'll get. In the event of a good exit, you might get to rent a Jeep and take a weekend trip to Atlantic City.
There you go.
Set your expectations there.
That's reality.
Social distance.
I had an AE, a company that I was at not long ago. She literally was recruited and told under the premise that her equity was going to make her, millionaire. And so she asked me to, early stage, like very early, one of the first ones, if not the first one, right? And I'm like, all right, well, I'm happy to look over your paperwork with you and like do some math and try to give some guidance, whatnot. And I saw the paperwork and I was like mortified for her. Like my heart like dropped. I'm like, oh my God, like if you make 5 figures, you're going to be lucky, even if we have like a massive kind of exit. And unfortunately, that gap in education or transparency or that misleading kind of thing that can be done in some organizations, that still exists big time.
So let me ask you this. So look, as an SDR and AE, right? They're presenting equity to me, not regardless of whether they're presenting equity to me as you're going to become a billionaire, which, too good to be true. Don't believe it. Should an SDR, like what kind of questions should they be asking? They shouldn't necessarily be asking about the cap table. Can they be asking for, I look at this, but I don't, that's too big of a risk. I want more on the front end. Like, is that negotiable? Like, what advice do you give to those people? Or is it like, hey man, know what you're going into. It'll be a nice bump if it happens, but you're really here to educate yourself on sales and sales education and process so that you can work your way towards that bigger payout. So don't overthink this. Like, what should they be thinking? How should they be looking at that? Like, what's your advice to those folks?
So, and I will just commit on the record that if and when I'm not a VP of sales, I will give the same answer. I think if you're an SDR and you're applying for a job and you're vetting out the company, you have limited time, right? I would not waste my time talking about stock options. It's not a significant part of why you're getting into the role. I would be trying to find out what opportunities I have for growth, who I'm going to learn from. I'd want to know what trajectory the business has, because sure, your stock options may be worthless, right, as an SDR if you take to a successful exit. But I'll tell you what's not worthless is riding the coattail of that success story and being someone who helped get the company there. And that was the case for me at Single Platform that got acquired for $100 million. I got nothing from it, but I leveraged that to become a VP of sales because of my experience living through that rapid scale. And it's why I am where I am today. So I have no hard feelings that I didn't earn on that acquisition, right? And I think that's when you're coming in at an entry level role, that if that company is going to have an exit, let's face it, it's going to have it with or without you, right? And so your expectation that you deserve some sort of big piece of that reward is far-fetched, right? What you should be coming into that role for is to learn and to grow and to get yourself to the next point.
You'd be shocked how many heads of sales and VPs of sales don't have the right context or the right understanding or information about equity. This is not just a SDR or AE kind of problem. There's a VP of sales that Richard and I are aware of who only in the last couple months realized that they had almost nothing in terms of equity and ownership in the company. And this is somebody who had built the company almost from the ground up to a 9-figure plus organization. And you should have seen this guy's like morale it just like melted off of him when we were having a conversation and he was just like, oh my God, what? Like I should have had some equity. And then there's multiple other people that we know that are running the same circles as the three of us that I've had conversations with. And they were asking me questions about equity and negotiations and whatnot. And they told me like how many shares that they had. And I asked all the other right questions. And I sort of spelled out for them like where they were at and what percentage of the total pool that was and what all that might be worth. And then I told them what I had in Main Street Hub that we sold for 175 million. I had, a significant chunk of shares, 7-figure number of shares. And they were like, what? I have like, 10,000. And so, it's really important to listen to what Colin's talking about here. You go into these startups, you don't optimize for equity, optimize for the learning, optimize for the role, optimize for the ride, if you will. Optimize for the people you can attach yourself at the hip to who might bring
build your brand off it, right?
Right, and exactly.
Look at our new AE, who I know Phil, right? Phil's a great example of that, who came in, right? Just grinded his ass off, and now he's running his own podcast. He's a top AE, and he did actually pick the right company to come to, right? And that's gonna be worth tenfold.
He also picked the right conference to go to to get advice from a couple people that may or may not have helped propel him forward. And
You know, I still didn't get to see the
movement.
picture of him on the surfboard, which I remember was a requirement.
Yeah.
These pictures do exist. I'm going to have to find it now.
I was actually on his podcast yesterday, so
Oh yeah,
good podcast. Yeah, so
that's awesome.
Yeah, we talked about you and how handsome you are and what a good man you are. You know, all that.
You know, Colin, Max Altschuler, who I know you know, was on the show not too long ago.
Yeah,
and he talked about how the 4-year vest is just archaic and needs to die and go away, right? And
what does he think it needs to be, shorter or longer?
He thinks it needs to be role and sort of time specific, stage specific vesting. So here's an example, and I'm 100% on board with him with this. In particular, because this is what I've done almost my whole career. So I go into an organization and they have no revenue, no process, no nothing, right? My job is essentially to get them from 0 to, let's call it 10 to 20 million ARR, get them through and up to like a Series C. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if I can do that in 2 to 3 years, which I've done, how does it make sense that I don't fully vest all the options that have been, you know, allocated to me? Like I did exactly what I was supposed to do for that stage of the company, right? And what we need to do. So why not just have, you know, if you're at the very beginning, like this is a 2-year job, you do your job, you're fully vested there. If you're somebody who's supposed to take the company from, you know, 100 million ARR to a billion ARR, maybe that's a different timetable and a different vest and a different allocation of shares. So I'm curious what you think. And I think he even brought up how the 1-year cliff is bullshit and an archaic, you know, kind of standard. I'm curious, you know, what you think about the cliff and the vesting and the sort of stage appropriate, you know, model that Max talked about. And anybody who hasn't listened or heard about this yet should go back and listen to our episode where we talked to Max about this.
That's interesting. So I've read a lot of Sam Altman's thoughts on this because he proposes really good, for those who don't know, Sam Altman's from Y Combinator. He proposes really good solutions to most of these problems. And you just brought up the one point that he makes that I don't agree with, which is he thinks the 4-year vest is actually too short and that companies are their valuations are increasing so fast now. And what he proposes is that in year 1, you vest 10%. In year 2, you invest 20%. Year 3, and so that the idea is you're vesting a smaller piece earlier on.
This is the worst piece of advice I've ever heard.
I hate it. But every other solution he has is great. I don't know what he was thinking. He was drinking too many White Claws when he got to that bullet.
He's probably thinking he's already made millions and millions and millions of dollars, and you know, I wonder how I can keep more of it if I build something else.
But no, I like what you said that you spoke about with Max, because it is situational, right? And it's not one size fits all. The chances of a VP of sales staying at a company for 4 years, we already know are it's almost zero, right? It's almost zero, and that doesn't mean zero. It doesn't mean that you did a bad job.
Yeah, it doesn't mean you failed. In fact, it might mean you did exactly what you're supposed to do.
You may have done it where too well.
You grow so fast and beat all these expectations. But let's just say, you know, you've never been a head of sales for like a 9-figure ARR company. You've never been the CRO at a company that's about to go public. And so they go higher above you and kind of top you off and potentially make your role redundant. And all of a sudden you're penalized and you're unable to have the opportunity to vest 50, 25%, 10, the final 10% of your options. It doesn't make any sense to me. And similar to your Skype story, you know, you go work someplace for 9, 10, 11 months, and all of a sudden all these people get whacked and they get nothing for all the value that they added because they didn't hit their 1-year cliff. I know Richard's going to be too big to say it, but I know Richard has personal experience with this type of thing before. So I just wonder, you know, how much longer everyone on the employee side is going to be willing to tolerate some of these terms that might not make sense anymore.
So I'll give you, I think there's a good tactical piece of advice. So there's 2 ways to think about this. One is there's a longer movement that needs to happen, right? In terms of people getting educated, knowing how to push back, knowing what to ask for, knowing how to negotiate. But that's not going to change overnight, because a lot of times the CEO or whoever you're negotiating with, they may not even control the board anymore, and they can't even make those decisions. And, you could end up losing the chance to get the job just because they have to wait for the next board meeting to even try to get approval on what you're trying to negotiate. Maybe they want to give it to you and they can't even do it. And that's the reality of what a lot of the scenarios are. And sometimes it's not the CEO. Sometimes it's past that. And so I think there's that, right? And I think Revenue Collective's doing a great job. Sam Jacobs helping to educate people and create that movement that's long-term. But for people today that are getting into these negotiations, you need to be tactical, and you need to think to yourself, when you're negotiating for that amount of stock options that's going to have those terms that you probably don't like, 4-year vest, whatever, you need to be happy with the fact that you're probably only going to end up getting half of that. And is that worth the next 2 years of working your ass off? And that's how you need to think of it. And if you do it that way, and maybe you're saying, you need to give me double, right? If it's vesting over 4 years, whatever it is, that's what you can control.
Or maybe you decide, you know what, that's worth it. That's definitely worth it for this stage of my life and where I'm at.
And that's how I went into Aircall. I set in my head, will I be happy if I leave here in 2 years and half of this vests? Is that worth it for me? Because that could very well be the case for anyone, right? And if it's the 1 year cliff you asked me about, I don't have a problem with the 1 year cliff. I'm curious to hear if you do. I actually think that feels fair. If you don't make it through the first year, that you get nothing.
I don't know that I fully agree that it's. I don't know that I agree it's fair. What about you, Richard? I'll let you talk.
Yeah, so I've been through that where I mentioned it in the interview. I said this is what can happen, and I want protections against it. And I was told no, and look, the guy. I let myself believe in the technology too much. And at the time it was right, but I got screwed at the month 7, right? And so then when things happened at month 7, I negotiated hard on severance. I was like, no, I'm not going to take $5,000. Like, sorry, I'd much rather. And I literally said it. I remember saying this to the COO at the time. I said, look, if you're paying me to shut up, it's going to cost you more than $5,000. They're like, you mean you'd go say something if we don't pay you more? I'm like, that's what you're asking me to sign. Like, don't be stupid about it, right?
Yeah.
That $5,000 was not going to change my life, and it wasn't going to corrupt me. But I was not above going to Glassdoor and ripping them apart. Because if they think that my value is that insignificant, well, then let me go post that. Like it's and have to at least be willing. To me, and Scott knows this about me, is I love having those arguments, and I probably hurt myself sometimes because I enjoy those arguments. I love being right too much, right? As opposed to sort of seeing the gray, which is one of the reasons Scott's such a good friend, and to me is because I'm like, Scott, am I being too Richard on this? Am I being too much of it? He's like, well, you might want to look at it this way. And, and it's probably what held me, I know it's what's held me back in other parts of my career before I started doing what I do now. I just don't like politics. Like I will call it out.
And this can be done the right way as well. Like, I don't know if you guys saw, but
I was just never very good at it.
Yeah, but the CEO of Carta just had to do this. I'm blanking on the CEO of Carta's name, but they just laid off 16% of their workforce. And he basically like auto vested everybody else's, shares, what have you, right? He's going to continue to let them vest, even though they're not with the company anymore. Paid out, like he's paying all their Cobras for keeping their insurance going through the end of the year. Gave every single person 3 months severance and that kind of thing. But the equity piece was really interesting to me, to let them continue to earn out, because that company has done quite well prior to all of this, and so there's real value there. And so when I see a company get it right, but when I see a company get that right, that infuriates me even more, knowing how many people are getting it wrong.
They had to get it right. Given their business, they had to get that right.
They had to get it right. Yeah.
I was part of that. I got
But they
let
did.
go at a company right before the acquisition, was unaware of the acquisition. I was taken care of with a nice severance. I was definitely hugged out the door. But then when the acquisition happened a few months later, I saw that everybody got immediately vested who stayed on, right? And I was like, wait a minute. And I went back and I read my severance letter, because at that point I was willing to sign, because it said, you're going to get X number of months, and that was worth it to me. And it even said in there, it said, based on your knowledge, you will not come back and sue. Like, it was based on that knowledge. So there was actually a clause in the letter that implied, if I had gone back and said, wait a minute, you guys didn't tell me you were going to vest everybody, you now owe me that. I probably could have gone back and done it, and it was a significant number. Like, it was no small number. But I just didn't have the energy to put towards it. Like, I just didn't.
That's the problem. Yeah, and you
right?
need a lawyer.
And they know that, right? And I didn't want to burn and I think I know I have done a great job not to burn the bridge with those people. Like, I could get those people on the phone if I wanted help or needed help, and Scott knows a couple of them, but I didn't go back and do it. So they did hug me out the door the right way. But again, nobody ever taught me to look at the fine print. Nobody ever taught me to look for that stuff, right? And so that's why I'm always like, if you're going to get let go and there's equity involved, don't sign anything.
Yeah, they don't teach you this stuff in college. There's one other piece that
when you go workplaces either.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's not in their advantage to do it. But,
right.
This
that's
is
why I think it's important for people like us to talk about it.
To speak up. Yeah. And look, I give credit to if anyone wants to learn more about this, like, you can read a lot. But Sam Jacobs put together what he calls the Bill of Rights, which is on Revenue Collective's website, which I think does a pretty damn good job of outlining what people should be asking for. The hard part is knowing how to ask for it, though. The one piece, Scott, that we didn't talk about is the exercise periods, which is right when you leave the company.
You got 90 days typically to.
You have 90 days, which the reason this is a huge problem, and this again comes back from the archaic model of you leave, and of course you're going to exercise within 90 days because it's already worth money and it doesn't cost you $1 to do it. But if you leave your startup now, you put in 2 years, 3 years of hard work, you were a contribution to getting the company's valuation increased and getting them that much closer, right? You now have 90 days to exercise your options, which basically means, let's assume you're in a VP role or whatnot. This is a significant piece of your comp. You have to now invest your cash into the business before there's any guarantee that money is gonna pay you back a return, and you could be losing a lot of money forever.
Talk about what that fee might be. I've had to do this 3 times now. So
you tell me then. You know more about it than I do.
Well, if you're a VP of sales and you've built up a significant, powerful business, like, you better have $100,000 to $200,000 lying around.
Oh, you mean how much you're going to use to? Yes.
To exercise. I'm talking about.
You're probably looking at least a year of your salary.
Yeah, you're going to have to come up with between $100,000 and $200,000.
Yeah.
And write a check that disappears into the void and into the abyss for a to be determined amount of time, in the hope that it comes back, significantly.
You literally become an investor in the business that you're now leaving with no guarantees.
And then the government taxes you on that spend and counts it as new income, even though you haven't actually realized the income, and in fact you've actually lost money on the whole deal.
Yes. And the reason that people
are completely
do that,
unprepared for that. How many? I know a lot of people. I'm fortunate enough that I've been able to do these exercises, but you talk about people trying to live paycheck to paycheck and month to month and things like that. How many people have that kind of money lying around? How many reps have $5,000 to $15,000 lying around that if they left their company, they'd be able to exercise those options?
They don't. And by the way,
what happens
the
to the
company
options
knows
if
that.
they don't exercise? Of course, the company knows that.
The company knows that, and so when they're when they're deciding how big the employee pool is going to be, they know, statistically, they know what percentage of what they issue is coming right back to them.
Yeah, and then they
They know
reissue it to somebody else.
And they don't tell you that
Yeah.
in your offer letter.
Yeah.
No,
Well, we could
they
go
don't.
on and on about this topic forever, but you probably need to get back to work.
I think we should do let's do a live podcast on this with Colin, right? That's like a webinar one night.
Sure. Yeah.
Like,
and why don't we summarize real quick, like the important things? I think, the amount of equity you're negotiating in an executive level job, you should be happy with if you only get, let's say, call it half of that, right? Because you're probably not going to be there the full 4 years. B, you should make sure you're getting monthly vesting to the extent that you can. C, you should really push for a 10-year vesting exercise period rather than 90 days. It's usually 90 or 10 years. And if you get the 10 years, that's the company's way of telling you, like, we actually want you to have the equity that you've earned. And we're not going to back you into a corner where you have to invest all of your life savings or whatnot to take a chance on the worst lottery ticket you'll ever buy, right? I think those are probably the three. And understand the preferential, the preferred stock and the terms of that, and understand. Yeah, and your company should be able to put together scenarios for you with the offer of saying, here, if we have an exit in 2 years, here's what happens, right? And you should also understand, I forget what the terminology is of this, but if you guys are getting acquired and the acquiring company decides that they're eliminating your job, what then happens to your stocks? You should have accelerated vesting on those.
It's the trigger. It's single trigger, double trigger.
Yeah.
So there's so much to unpack.
There's so much.
We're gonna have to bring Colin back, or maybe, as Richard says, we'll do a live event here.
I think we do a live when we get questions from people. So I think that'd be cool.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Sounds good.
Appreciate your time.
Maybe we get like a lawyer who knows all the good stuff on the call.
Or we can just get Sam to come on and talk about his Bill of Rights.
Oh, there you go. Actually, he does know it really well.
Yeah. Get Max on there too. So,
Sam would talk about this any day. Yeah.
So Colin, we always sort of turn this around for folks is, how can we help you? What can we do to help Colin in terms of life, business, health, wealth, all these things going on right now? Because you've been very generous with yourself and your knowledge and your time.
You know what? I think you guys have both already helped me a lot, right? I mean, Richard has referred people to me. You guys have gotten on calls with our team and mentored them and helped them. I think if anyone else would have asked me that question, I'd probably have an answer. But you guys have honestly, I'm not just saying it, both of you. I mean, Scott has come out to speak at our events. And I think you guys are tremendously generous with your time. I think you enjoy it, and that's why you do it, and we're all grateful. And I know that most of the team, although the folks who have interacted with you guys would say that as well. So honestly, I can't ask for a thing, guys. I just say thank you.
If you do think of something, make sure that you reach out to us and let us know. So
join one of our upcoming events, or we'll do more events. I guess just keep talking, man. That's all.
Well, it sounds like we might have a new one that we're all going to do. So
let's do it.
Awesome, man.
Sponsored by Aircall.
Yeah, and I get a cut of that, right?
Yeah.
We'll sell sponsorships to the podcast. So,
All right, Colin.
Good stuff, guys. Stay healthy out there.
You too, bud.
Bye-bye.